Sector 3, 1 December 2020. This is video number 2. The FBI last Wednesday released new details about the case of Faisal Mohammed, who in November 2015, while he was a freshman at the University of California, Merced, entered a classroom and stabbed 4 people. It was already known back at the time of the attack that young Mohammed was a jihadi. From the College Fix reported that he was found to have an image of the ISIS flag, a handwritten manifesto with instructions on how to behead someone, and reminders to pray to Allah. The new information that has just been released, like 2 days ago, let's see. About the case only confirms this and shows the abject idiocy of the university's utterly predictable reaction to the attack. Muhammad, according to the Associated Press, planned to praise Allah while slitting the throats of classmates and use a gun taken from an ambushed officer to kill more. Then he planned to call 911 to report the killings. Quote, read the Quran until he heard sirens, and then take calm shot after shot with the gun when the police arrived. He mapped out a detailed plan for his jihad. It included putting on a balaclava at 7:45 a.m. and saying in the name of Allah before stepping into his classroom and ordering students to use zip ties he provided to bind their hands. Muhammad also planned to make a fake 9/11 distress call to report a suicidal guy. Now, to report a suicidal guy, this apparently is how they write at Associated Press these days. And wait for police outside the classroom before ambushing from behind and, quote, and slit calmly yet forcefully one of the officers with guns, end quote. Presumably in the officer's throat in accordance with the Quran's directive, when you meet the unbelievers, strike their necks. All this stands in stark contrast to how the attack was initially reported and even more to the reaction to it at the University of California, Merced. Muhammad's attack, as the College Fix noted back in November 2015, was widely characterized as, quote, revenge for being kicked out of a study group, end quote. Even worse, instead of waking up to the reality of Islamic jihad, many at the University of California, Merced, mourned for the attacker with a Facebook RIP tribute to Faisal Mohammed gaining massive support among the campus community. I'll hold my tongue. Not even that was enough for the relentlessly woke UC Merced faculty who hosted a teach-in that about 200 students attended entitled, Don't Turn Our Tragedy into Hate. It didn't mention Islam or jihad at all, except in the context of discussion about how Muslims are victims of Islamophobia. According to one student who attended the teach-in, Islamophobia was cited as the reason people want to call it a terrorist attack. People were quick to sympathize with the attacker and assume anyone who thought this was related to radical Islam was a xenophobic racist. Among the topics discussed were, what does mental health have to do with this? How do we define our community? What lives are grievable? And what do race and religion have to do with this? Standing out in this soup of fashionable leftist shibboleths was this: why are men more likely to be perpetrators of violence? One speaker suggested that the attack was all about men not being allowed to be weak, self-centered, weepy narcissists. Quote, anger, that is really what we think about when we think about emotional men. They are subject to social sanctions if they deviate from masculinity. If you are perceived as failing at it, you are subject to being called a fag, a pussy, a wimp, pretty much what women are, right? So when you have this limited ability to sort of express your emotions and possible feelings of emasculation, of low esteem, how do you really deal with that? A lot of times they engage in violence. They need to compensate for their loss of masculinity in the most manly way they have access to, and unfortunately, a lot of times that's violence. I can hear what my wife would be saying right now in my head, but I won't repeat it. It's supposed to be for children. Of course, it was all about toxic masculinity, don't you see? If poor Faisal hadn't been so pressured to conform to society's notions of masculinity, if he'd just been able to put on a comfy shift and lounge around his dorm room in high heels, he would never have gone on his stabbing spree. Faisal Muhammad stabbed 4 people just because he was a sensitive soul in a world that was too harsh for him. What other possible explanation could there be? The University of California, Merced is no different from any other campus all over the country today, full of self-righteous, pseudo-intellectual, indoctrinated bots who have been thoroughly imbued with the notion that when Islamic jihadists attack us, it's our fault. You know, like when the black Hebrew Israelite attacked, unprovoked, ambushed, this couple, this white couple in their home. It was their fault, I'm sure. I'm going to guess, he probably won't even get hate crime charges because obviously you can't have hate crime if it's like that. All too many, even among law enforcement and counterterrorism officials, assume the same thing. No number of Faisal Muhammads, and there will be many more, will convince them otherwise. Nonetheless, it is unfortunate but true that eventually all this denial and willful ignorance is going to blow up in everyone's face. We can only hope that the blow up won't be literal. Times are coming, people. Times are coming. The lines are being drawn, if they're not drawn already. Groups are picking sides. Who did you pick? 623 out.